Okay, so this session is now being recorded. So thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Ailey and I'm the program coordinator at ArtsBuild Ontario. And I'm very excited to be here today for this webinar on marketing your rental spaces. We're here with Stephanie Draker from Work and Culture and Rob Zeidler of the Dabert Group and the Cotton Factory in Hamilton. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with ArtsBuild Ontario. We are the only organization in Ontario dedicated to realizing long-term solutions for building, managing, and financing the sustainable arts facilities needed in Ontario communities. We are thrilled to be able to offer this webinar as part of our learning series, which is a collection of learning opportunities around our core programs, including Space Finder in Canada, the Arts Facilities Mentoring Network, Asset Planner for the Arts, and Energy Conservation. This webinar and workshop series will help support arts organizations and their creative spaces, and these sessions will provide the tools, best practices, and feature guest speakers from the sector to inform and inspire facility managers. We know many organizations like yourselves rely on rental revenues to support creative operations, so we're here today to learn a little bit more about how we can promote our creative spaces and engage with renter audiences. So now, Steph, I'll turn things over to you.
Great, thank you for the intro, Ailey. And I'd just like to add that Work and Culture is thrilled to be partnering with ArtsBuild on this project. A little bit about Work and Culture. So we are an art services organization that provides business skills and career development support to people working in the arts, culture, and heritage. We provide a variety of resources, learning tools, and programs, as well as our well-known job board that many of you might be familiar with. I just wanted to cover a couple of quick housekeeping notes before we get started. We will be having a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. You're welcome to save all the questions you have until then, or if you have something that comes up while Rob is presenting, you can type that into the chat box that you'll see at the bottom left right-hand corner of your screen. And we'll try to get to as many as we can at the end. If we have any left over, Ailey will be collecting them and then trying to figure out a best way to respond to them after the webinar. And as Ailey mentioned, this session is being recorded, so you'll be able to revisit and listen to it online through ArtsBuild Ontario's website, as well as Work and Culture. So feel free to share the link with any colleagues that might not have been able to make it today. So, without further ado, why don't we get started? I am very pleased to introduce Robert Zeidler, who is the senior partner of the Dabert Group, a real estate firm specializing in repurposing historic buildings, and currently he is repurposing the Cotton Factory, a 116-year-old cotton mill complex at 270 Sherman Avenue North in Hamilton, Ontario, into a creative industries community. Rob has over 20 years experience in both property management and leasing at firms such as Brookfield and Oxford Properties. We're very pleased to have him here today to speak about marketing your space rental.
Stephanie, thanks very much. Hi, everybody. Rob Zeidler here. So I'm here today to talk about it, and I'm going to try and be as general as possible because I know the people listening in today will come from a wide gambit of people interested in renting out spaces to artists. So the first thing I want to talk about is if you're going to lease your space out, a lot of you will be in very different stages. So there'll be everything from someone who has an existing artist studio and they just want to lease it out, to someone who has an idea for creating a group or a cluster of artist studios together and they don't know where to start. So what for some of you, you may have passed this stage a long time ago. For others, you're just coming up to it. So just bear with me, and I'm going to go through everything for those who might be starting from square one. So the first thing is, before you actually start to lease your space, you really need to have a good sense of your vision. And who are you? And when I say that, it's more than just what do I have to rent. I mean, who are you as an arts organization? Are you an arts organization? Are you a property developer? Because there are many property developers who say, well, I'm not ready to turn this building into commercial spaces or condos or whatever, so I'm going to rent it out to artists for a few years. So you need to have a clear idea of who you are before you start thinking about leasing your space. And then you need to sort of say, well, what art spaces do you want? And when I say want, it's, because some people will be building out their studios or performance spaces or rehearsal spaces. And you really have to have a good idea in your head of how that's all going to mesh together with who you are and what your vision is. And the other one is, what sort of environment culture are you creating? So there will be those who have no environment and culture. They just say, look, this is a temporary use and I'm just renting it out to artists until we have a better use for it. And I have no desire to have any environment or culture. And there'll be other people like us who have a very, very strong idea about creating a culture of creativity in the building and promoting it, creating a community of those in your building and getting them to interact with each other and creating an active program of doing that. So once you've sort of got a clear vision of who you are, what sort of spaces you want to have, and what sort of culture you're creating, then you've got to figure out who your target market is. Is it the small artist? Is it the larger, more professional studios for artists who are in mid-career to at the height of their career? Is it a dance studio? Are they dance groups? You need to know exactly what it is, and you need to be very precise. It's not like, well, we're interested in artists. You really have to know exactly who you are and how it's going to fit in, because the other thing is too, which I'm not going to go into too much detail, this may trigger rezoning of your building. It may trigger a change of use of your building. It may trigger certain changes in tenant separation, in sound separation, all these other things. So it's very important to have that. And then the other thing is, you need to have a brutally honest market research on what will rent and for how much. So as a good example, for sort of mid-career, starting to mid-career artist studios, a lawyer will say, well, we have 3 lawyers, we have a meeting room, we have a copier room, I need reception area, and I need a seating area when people walk in. What's that going to cost me? An artist will say, I've got $450 a month or $300 a month. What can I get for that? So don't build a space that is unaffordable for artists. If you build a space that requires $1,500 in rent for an artist, chances are it's going to sit vacant. So you really do need to think long and hard about who you're going to rent to and what they can afford. The next one is a very solid financial plan showing required rents for profitability. And if you've got the space, it's one thing, right? Because then you don't have construction costs. This is how much rent that space is going to throw off, and therefore this is what we can afford to do with it. But if you're building, you have to be very careful. That you don't blow your brains out on construction, and when you're finished go, oh my goodness, we're losing money renting these spaces out because we can't pay back our construction costs. So you really have to be very, very hard-nosed about this. And what I would do is I'd strongly recommend, you'd be surprised how many supporters of your organization are bankers or accountants or whatever. And if you reach out to them and say to them, can you help us on things like this? You'll be surprised how quick they are to volunteer their time and effort. And the fifth point is, do not try the build it and they will come approach without very strong backing. So in other words, if you've got an arts organization who said, here's a $1 million grant, we're going to build out this art center and away we go. That's one thing. If you as a small arts group say, look, we want to create some space and that we're going to rent that out, and it will, one, encourage and create a community of artists in our building or a complex, and at the same time too, it'll help to pay for our costs. That's a very different thing. And if you are working on that kind of approach, which for instance we are, we only build out 2 or 3 units at a time, then we rent them, then we move on and build the next one. And it's by going very slowly but surely. It's taken us longer than we would have liked, but we're always profitable. We're always have spaces renting out, and we never have to worry. And if, for instance, we had built out 3 units, let's say, and they hadn't rented, I would have gone to my contractor and said, look, we're just going to put construction on hold until we can rent these out. Now, we've never had to do that, but that's what would happen. The next thing is, I would strongly recommend building a good team. So you need a property manager, perhaps a broker, your contractor, your banker. If you can get a team together before you start even from square one, chances are you're going to succeed because they'll bring the necessary strengths together. If you only have a few people who are sitting on a committee and saying, oh, we ought to do this, I would question your ability to successfully carry this out on a large scale. And the stronger your team is and the more committed your team is, the more likely you are to succeed. And the other thing which I would say is make sure the people on your team share your culture. If you get a real estate broker who's a shark and really doesn't care about anyone except how much commission he's earning, and I don't belittle any, I have a broker and I have two, and they're wonderful and they totally share our vision. But if either your contractor or your broker or anybody doesn't share your vision, I would strongly suggest that you pick someone else, because it will be hard for you to move forward if you're working on one set of ethos of how you operate and they're working on a different one. If, for instance, if your broker's putting inappropriate people in because they're only interested in commission, you're the one who's going to have the heartache. So I would strongly recommend you put your team together before you start and make sure you all share your vision. The next thing is culture. And this is more the culture of you as the renter. And you can have a whole variety of different outlooks. You could be a developer, you could be an arts organization, you could be anything. But I would say that artists are constantly being taken advantage of, right? They're forever being said, oh, well, why don't you give your piece of art to our charity art auction for free and then we'll make money and you won't. And it's, oh gosh, it'll give you good exposure. And artists actually need money, not exposure. So they're very, very wary about being taken advantage of. And if they get the hint that you're there to use and abuse them, it could badly damage your reputation and your long-term viability. So always in this thing, be very honest and upfront with artists. Say exactly what you mean. If there's an issue, be upfront about it. And what I found is artists are great. They're absolutely fantastic. So if you say to them, we'll rent it to you for this price, but we can't afford to install air conditioning, so you're going to cook in the summer. And they'll go, for that price, I don't mind cooking in the summer. I can live with that, that's okay. But you don't want to get them in and then, May, June arrives and they're baking in their units and they're going, what do you mean there's no air conditioning? So just be upfront with any problems, challenges you're going to have, and they will be able to, and artists will be flexible. Now, in the same way, you've got to be flexible with your tenants' challenges. So, for instance, if you have an artist who's working on a grant, which means they can only rent the space for 4 months, you may well say, okay, that works for me. We'll put you in for 4 months because we'd like to see you finish your project. And we've done that. We put in an artist who needed a big wide open space just to work. And we gave her just a big vacant unit to work for 1 month so she could complete her commission. And you will find with artists, for instance, an artist will come to you and say, look, I haven't sold a piece in the last 4 months. I can't afford my rent anymore. You have to, as a landlord of creative spaces, go, okay, let's get you out of this space. Let's fix this, let's address whatever your problems are, and we'll try and get someone else in. And we've done that before, where an artist has come to us and just said, look, I can't afford my space anymore. Could you please let me out of it? And we have said, we'll go and find someone else to get you out of your space, and we've done that to help them. And I think that's something you need to go into. When I worked for Brookfield in Oxford, that's something they never would have considered. It's a 5-year lease, and that's your problem. If you've got financial issues, you better go get some money or we're going to sue you. And that's how they work, and that's fine. But I would suggest that when you're working in the arts community, you don't want to be suing anybody for $350 and chasing them around and creating all these problems. So I would strongly recommend that you are very flexible. And then you may have challenges. You may have challenges in that your funding only comes once a year or whatever. But if you go to everyone and say, look, we've got we can only build out 2 units every month, and I'm sorry, that means you can't move in for 7 months or something, then as long as you let them know up front, they will be okay with it. And at least they're making an informed decision.
Hi there. Can anyone sounds like we've lost some sound. Just want to check that that's a mic issue. Okay, it looks like Rob. Hi, Rob. Have we got you back there?
There we go. Are we up? Hi, great. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened.
I think you got booted. If you want to
okay,
just
so let's just
click
to
your
wrap up this slide here.
microphone again, make it turn green,
BJ,
and then
can you hear me loud and
we
clear?
should have you back.
Hello, can you hear me? Hi, can you hear me? Okay, Hi. Hello? Hi, can anyone hear me? Okay, I'm getting lots of yeses, so I'm assuming that people can hear me. Okay, so let's carry on. So just to wrap up this slide, it's really important to be, you know, artists are just the best people, and they will work very hard with you, but you need to work with them. Just be honest and upfront. As long as they know what's going on, they'll be happy and they'll be able to support you. Okay, so the question is where to start. The chicken or the egg question. Do we build an example or do we sell the vision? And what I would strongly recommend is do both. So the first thing you need to do is come up with a plan of what do you want to do. You need to design your new or the units you're going to convert and come up with a very realistic floor plan. And say, you know, how is this going to work? What is it going to cost? And you really have to pay attention to the cost estimates because it's so easy for costs to run over. And that's why it's so important to find a reliable builder. Because what can happen is your builder comes in and halfway through the project, you suddenly discover it's costing twice as much. So, you know, build a buffer in. I'd recommend at least 30% because especially if you're adapting old buildings, there's always something you're going to discover once you start knocking stuff down. And have someone who you really can trust and it comes very highly recommended. So once you have a design, once you have come up with your costs, you have to go back and say, does the numbers match our plan? Can we get enough rent to justify the cost of construction? If that all lines up, then go out to your community and before you do anything, say, hey, if we build these, you know, 350 square foot units and we can rent them out for $400 each a month, would you support this? And if they say yes and they come back, then you're in business. If they say those spaces are too big or they're too expensive, you need to go back to square one and start again. Then the next thing that I would strongly recommend doing is if you don't have to start construction, I would get either signed memorandums of understanding or leases. And quite often people will only want to sign an MOU. For instance, if you have another arts organization, they say, look, you haven't started building, we don't know what's going on, but we will sign an MOU to show that we're serious about this. And then often it's a good idea, and this is what we did, is we actually were only going to build one studio. And we were renting them out so quickly that we had to switch from building one studio to building the entire second floor of the storehouse, which was 13 studios, because we had them all rented out in about 2 weeks. And I mean, that's a great problem to have. But one of the advantages of building a model studio is, first of all, your artistic studios or your dance space or whatever is a theoretical concept that people can buy into on an intellectual level, but they really can't say, well, I don't know if we should do this until they see it. And then once they actually see walls and windows and everything else, they go, oh, I get it, let's do this. The other thing is why I'd recommend building a model studio is a proof of concept. So in other words, we've estimated that we can build every studio for $10,000. Can we do this? And then when you build one or two, you go, yes, we can, or no, we've totally misjudged what it's going to cost to build. And you don't want to find that out after building 15 of these things. You want to find out if you've got a problem in your costs or in your anything else after only building one or two. And the other thing which I would warn for is construction timelines. Certainly on our first section, when we built out the second floor of the storehouse, we did not realize how long it was going to take us to build out. So we said, oh yeah, we'll have it ready for you in 90 days. But because we were starting from scratch, we were ready in about 120 days. So we had all these tenants lining up saying, when can I move in? When can I move in? And you're having to sort of say, oh, gee, I'm really sorry. Can you hang off for another couple of weeks? Now, again, artists are amazing, so they were very good about it. But, legally, they could have said, well, you owe me a space as of this date, and that's your problem. So I really watch out for those construction timelines, because it's not the building of the actual unit. It's, have you installed the heating? Have you installed the air conditioning? What about electrical? What about the IT cabling, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Those are the things that will come back to bite you. So just keep an eye out for that. The next thing is rent. So once you've done all of that, you've got a plan in action, the market likes it, you want to get out and rent. And what I would suggest you do is reach out to your community. So a lot of you as arts organizations will have people who are on your mailing list, and they are your natural supporters. And even if they're not going to rent a space, they want to see you succeed. So if you reach out to your community and say, look, we're planning to build 10 artist studios. If you know of any artists who are interested, this is the size, this is the cost, please send them our way. And the thing is, if you can convince your supporters of what a great project it is, they will actually go out and sell your project for you. They will contact your friends. What we do here is when we had an artist recently who was moving back to Toronto, so he had to give up his studio. So we said, let us find someone. So what I did was email my sort of 8 most supportive artists and said, do you know anyone who wants to move in? And within 30 days, the space was rented. So, you can get your supporters to do the leasing for you, and that's probably the best way. Now, what I would say is once you've reached out to your community and you've talked to them, and based on their feedback, I would create your promotional materials then. Now, of course, this is a continuous feedback cycle. So it's not as though you're doing this in a linear fashion. You're often doing this 2 or 3 different things at the same time. But your promotion material is really to attract them. So you need their feedback for what they need and what they want to see, so you know what to advertise. The next thing is, I would say, is get your story out on social media. I'll talk about social media later, but the operative word there is your story. Don't be out there saying we have a 15-foot by 20-foot artist studio that rents for this much. You want the story of the space you're creating and who you are and why you do what you do for that to work. And then the second one is, again, reach out to media with stories. And quite often when people reach out to media, they reach out with something that's completely uninteresting. Oh, look, our arts organization wants to rent spaces. Well, the media says that's lovely, but that doesn't affect us. But if you reach out with stories of the artists you have in the building, of what's going on, of how you intend to turn a short-term solution into a long-term opportunity to promote the arts within your city or your town, that is the kind of thing the media will be interested in. That is the kind of thing that they'll print, and that will do a lot towards getting people to come to your space. The next thing is it of course depends on who you're trying to attract. But for a lot of artists, put your leasing materials out in your community. So create simple things like postcards and put them out in cafes, galleries, things like that, where people walking by will see them. Again, as we mentioned about social media, you can also put your studio rental info on social media, and we do that. You can advertise in Kijiji, Space Finder. There's quite a few things to aid people who want to find a studio, and I would recommend those all highly. And then for larger spaces, if you're renting 2,500, 5,000, 8,000 square feet, I would strongly recommend a broker, just because they're more complicated deals and you won't have the access to the tenants that they will. So they'll likely see people before you will. And they'll also, if they're bringing a large tenant in with 5,000 square feet, normally they'll arrive with a broker. And so you want to make sure that, you've got a broker looking out for your best interests on your side. And the final point about renting out is, don't think of this as a process. Think of this as a cycle. So for instance, when we have spaces, small spaces to rent, we put them out on Kijiji, and we would put them out about every month. And we would send an email to brokers every month. And we would put some more postcards out every month. And it's just, okay, it's the 5th of the month, it's time to put something on Kijiji. And I think if you think of it in those terms of being a rental cycle, especially if you've got 1 or 2 units, it's very different. But if you're trying to rent out 10, 20 different artist studios, it's going to take time. And don't be disheartened, just every month, keep doing what you do and it will fill. The next thing I want to talk about, we'll get into social media in a little more detail, and what is your story? And if you look at it, you want to identify and refine your story. It's interesting, if you look at the products and the things that most people love, whether it's an Apple iPhone or whatever, it's often just as much about the story of the company or how the product was developed as it is the actual product themselves. And so when you're talking about your arts group, don't tell them what you do. Tell them why you do things, because that's what people are able to identify with. That's the hook to get people to convert them into your supporters. They're not going to be a supporter of yours just because you rent out spaces. They're going to be a supporter of yours because you support artists. You are the ones who are making sure that you create an environment where artists can come to work and create and not be nervous about being thrown out on the street 6 months later because somebody decides to build a condo. So this is the kind of thing that you want to think about when you're creating your story. And the second thing is share it. Get out there on social media and share your story. I will warn you, do not be a shill for your space. If if every single week you're getting out on social media saying, come rent our space, it's only $400 for 400 square feet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, people very quickly will unfriend you. They don't really want to hear about it. If you're talking about the things that are occurring in your art space and the people who are there, that's what they're interested in. And remember that 80% of your Facebook feed, for instance, should be about other people, not about yourself. And you should be supporting local artists, local arts groups, local events, and talking about what's going on in your community, both physical and artistic community. And so work on that 80-20 rule to get it out there, because often the person who reads on your Facebook feed about an interesting event that's occurring says, I really ought to rent a space there. So that's just as much a part of leasing as is, actually saying that how big the unit is and what it costs. So the next thing is events. I think events are great. You have to be careful. There are building code issues with events. So for instance, the building code could say, well, you're an office space and the event space would be an assembly. So be careful about this. I wouldn't go looking for trouble. Certainly don't phone up the city and saying, hey, do you think we ought to rezone? Because they'll love it. It's about $150,000 in fees, and most arts organizations don't have that kind of money. But don't go looking for trouble. Don't go and turn your space into an assembly area without making sure you meet code and everything else. But if, for instance, if you're having, if one of the arts organizations in your space says, do you mind if we use the common area to have our AGM, that's not going to raise any flags with anyone. That's just fine. It's a one-off use. But what you want to do is use events to bring the community into your space. You want people who normally wouldn't come to your space to come there. One, to be your supporters, and two, to reach out to their friends and say, hey, I was at the cotton factory at a great event and this was interesting, and look what's going on there, look at all the changes that are being made. And so they will become your supporters and attract clients for you through totally unrelated events. I would also say organize classes and workshops as a draw. They're also a community builder. So, for instance, if you have an artist community, and one of the lunch and learns we're creating for our tenants is a talk about taxation for artists and how to look after your taxes and take care of them and make sure you're looking after them properly, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to be doing marketing for artists. So there's the sort of business side of being an artist. We also have a still life class that occurs in one of the office spaces every Tuesday night, and they get about 30 people coming in to do that. So, these events will bring people in and get you better known in your community, which will lead to leasing. But I would strongly recommend you avoid anything that seems too closely related to leasing. So, for instance, if in the still life class somebody came down in and was handing out people flyers on, here, rent a space, I think a lot of people would be turned off. While if you got them piled up against a corner, people as they're leaving said, I'd love to be part of this community, and would pick up the flyer and say, you know what, I'll contact them and see about moving into the cotton factory. Then what I would recommend is we have a lot of events that build tenant community. So for instance, last year we had an event called Factory Frost, and we had all the artists come to bring their works up to our large space on the 3rd floor, and they exhibited their arts up there. We actually brought in some art groups that were not tenants. We brought in live performances, we brought in a dance group, we brought in an aerial group, and it was very much a tenant-led community building event. And it was great because it got we had about 400 or 500 people come. They got to see what's happening in the cotton factory. They got to meet our tenants, see the community that's here. Now, it was in no way, shape, or form directly leasing related, but it really helps us when we're wanting to lease space. And a lot of the tenants who I now have are people who came to something that was occurring here, like Glamour and the Hammer, which was a fashion show put on by the Good Shepherd. And I got 2 tenants from that event, and that wasn't even run by us. The other one is I would encourage your tenants to hold their events in your space. So for instance, if somebody's saying, oh, well, we're going off to here, there, or wherever to have our AGM, to have our whatever, our retreat, and saying, well, why don't you use our communal space? Why don't you use this? Why don't you use that? Then what it does is they feel, first of all, they're drawing their own crowd. And second of all, they feel that they are part of the building. So events are a great way to build that support base, to build awareness of your art center. You just, again, be careful about how you go about doing it, and that you speak with an architect about, are there assembly area issues that need to be addressed, and that you address those issues. So word of mouth is the most effective way, by far and away. Anybody, when they see advertising, they're always like, well, that's just advertising, they'll say anything. But if a friend of yours says, I'd really recommend you buy this product, you go to this place, you lease an art space at the cotton factory or wherever, then they are far more likely to do that than if I'm busy explaining it to them. And I really would, don't be afraid to ask for this, because what will happen is we'll get emails from our tenants saying, listen, I just want to let you know that our operator, Colin, did a fantastic job, or that I really enjoyed this event, or whatever. And I'll quite often write back and say, thank you very much for telling that. Would you be kind enough to put that on Facebook? Would you be kind enough to put that on that event, photos of that event on whatever, whether it's Snapchat or Twitter or whatever, and they're often very happy to do it. And give them the chance to tell your story, because when you are busy telling your story, people take it with a grain of salt, and I'd say a little more. But when your tenants are telling the story, um, uh, they really believe it. And we've got a video coming up, and I'd like you to think about who's talking in the video, and notice that you never see my voice or my face. And that for me was really important, because it's important that it's the voice of our community here and not me. And I would work hard to identify your boosters and encourage their voices. So there are certain tenants of mine who are wonderful, wonderful people and are forever boosting us. And I keep that in mind. And so when they say, do you mind if I ask a favor? I say, you know what, you do a lot for us. Absolutely no problem. Happy to help you in any way I can. But the final one's a big warning. When you build community, that means all your tenants talk to each other. And it means when they're happy, they all share how happy they are with each other. And when they're unhappy, they all share with each other about how unhappy they are. So what it means is, if you're not paying attention to your customer service, you are not going to have a tenant come up to your office. You're going to have 10 or 15 tenants come up to your office. And they're a lot more, sometimes more difficult to deal with. So you have to keep, the eye on the ball, and customer service, building community, meeting their needs, and then there's nothing worse than somebody getting on social media and talking about what an awful place you are and how you don't look after your tenants and things like that. So we work very hard at it, and we're very conscious and very deliberate in how we talk to our tenants. Oh, if everybody can just on the chat tell me whether or not you're able to hear me. Okay, good. So let's carry on. So we're going to watch a video now, and this is the video we created for leasing. So when you're watching this, think about it. This is how we lease our space. And if I could ask Stephanie to make that happen. Okay, so that was the video on talking about or showing word of mouth and how important it is for you as an arts organization to have to, and you know, I mean, we didn't put words in anyone's mouths. We phoned up. In fact, we had 3 or 4 of our boosters who came to us and said, why didn't you include me? I would have loved to have been in that video. We just went to them and said, do you mind talking about the cotton factory, and do you mind if we film you? So, but it's a very conscious effort building that community. So what I'd finish up on is turning vision into reality with community. And when I speak about community, I mean your tenant community, i.e. how your tenants get along with each other and work together and interact with each other, and how you deliberately plan something that the Center for Social Innovation calls collision. And that is to say that you give your tenants opportunity to bump into each other and talk to each other and get to know each other. There's the physical community. We're part of the Sherman Hub. We're very proud of where we are in Hamilton and being part of Hamilton's industrial heritage. And then, of course, there's the artistic community. There's the greater artistic community of Hamilton and the local region. This doesn't occur by accident. We aren't building community as just, oh gosh, it just happened on its own. We are very deliberate about it. We're very thoughtful about it. For instance, we had a potential tenant come to do a tour, and man, he was cranky. He was just, the second he arrived, he was complaining. And about a minute into the tour, we sort of went, okay, let's make this tour a short one because we're not renting to you. And I would strongly recommend you find people who fit in with you, fit in with your ideas, fit in with your beliefs, and who are going to help you build your community. So some final thoughts again to recap is be honest and authentic. Artists are wonderful people. And when I say artists, I mean dancers, musicians, fine artists, sculptors, ceramic artists, everybody. And they will work with you. If you say, look, I'm sorry, we're going to turn this into an office building in 3 years, so anything we rent you is only for 3 years, they can then make a rational decision and say, okay, we're going to do that. And if you are a struggling arts organization that doesn't have a lot of money and you say, look, we have no air conditioning in the summer, they go, that's okay, we can live with that. But it's when you don't talk to people that they get really upset, and that's when it can really hurt your reputation in the artistic community. I would say when you're designing your spaces and you're thinking about what you're going to create, don't think about yourself. Don't say, well, we need to have, $20,000 a month in rental income for us. Say, what spaces have we got? What kind of tenants can we have? Will this create a good mix for these different kinds of tenants? What budget do our tenants have? Because if you create beautiful spaces that are too expensive, you're setting your artistic tenants up to fail. You really got to work around their budget and not try and talk them into renting a space that's too expensive for themselves. I would strongly, for those of you who have enough space to create a community, I'd strongly encourage you to do that. I would strongly recommend things like kitchenettes so that they have a chance to bump into each other and get to know each other, and tenant events which they get to know each other so you can build that community. Newsletters are a great way of building that community. And the other thing I would say is, you're there really to support your tenants. You're there to provide them with the space so they can succeed. And if you support them, they'll support you. So always think about it from the tenant's perspective and not from your own perspective. So that's it. Questions?
Okay, thank you so much, Rob. That was fantastic. And I echo the sentiments of everyone else and that it was an excellent video. So we're going to open the floor to questions. If you have a question, we are not going to enable mics, so please type it in the chat box there, and we're going to do our best to answer them in sequence. Okay, so if you just type your message there, I'll read it aloud for Rob, and we'll be able to get started on that.
So the one thing before the first question goes in, I want to give a shout out to Oliver. Oliver came to see us. He runs something called the Akin Collective in Toronto, and he was growing too fast to come to Hamilton. So we built our own collective here, and hats off to him for the great job he's doing in Toronto, and thank you for the inspiration to create our own share space for tenants, for artists. So we give them about a 10-foot by 10-foot square area for around about $150 all in a month. and it was an inspiration for us, and thank you. So, short-term rentals, club meetings and things like that, absolutely. Now, what you have to do is make sure when you're doing this, I would think about how it all fits together. So you want to make sure that, if somebody says we're just want to have a club meeting, well, that's super. Are you going to disrupt my other tenants? Where are you going to meet? What are you going to need? How often are you going to do it? Because it's sort of like a Tetris game, and those pieces are constantly falling and moving, and you've got to be constantly rearranging them as it's going along. But I wouldn't be afraid of short-term rentals. Just make sure that it isn't all short-term rentals, that that these things, you have a good, healthy mix of events, and a good, healthy mix of tenants, and a good, healthy mix of leases.
Okay. Oh, fantastic. I'll read out the next question there, Rob. John Ryerson says, the biggest challenge is core tenants that can pay the overhead for smaller users. This pushes into a not-so-core mission options. Do you have any comments on that?
That's a tricky one because it's kind of a little vague. For instance, I'll give you a good example. We had an engineering firm when the second floor was wide open who came to us and said, look, we want to rent 20,000 square feet. You have 20,000 square feet on the second floor. Would you rent to us? So we did a tour with them. We talked to them. They were very keen to come. They loved the space. And we sort of sat down and had a meeting and saying, well, is this us? Does this really work for us? Is this who we want to be? And the answer was no. So we went back to them and said, look, we're very pleased that you are interested in the building, and thank you for coming, but no, we are not going to rent to you. And so be careful of being sucked down this way or that way just so you can rent some space. Now, obviously, you've got to make ends meet. You've got to make money. I totally get that. And what you might say is, well, we're putting this tenant in here for a year because we can't afford a different build out, or, we need to fill some space and earn some money. But long term, you should be trying to identify the tenants you want and attracting them and filling your building with that, and not getting pulled off in another direction, because you'll wake up in 3 or 4 years and say, who are these people in my building, and they don't fit with our core mission, they don't fit with our values, and you'll confuse your current tenants who are like, well, I thought this was an arts related building.
Great. So a little bit of a follow-up to that question there came out. When you're contacted by a potential tenant who's not right for your mandate.
That's a tough one. That's hard. I mean, I would do it on a case-by-case basis. There's no need to one is as polite as possible, and I would just say, we don't have a space that meets your needs right now. Thank you for considering the cotton factory. I certainly enjoyed meeting you on the tour, and leave it at that. If they're not right for you, just very politely sidestep it and just say, look, we're really sorry, we don't have the space for you.
That's great. Danielle wants to know, how do you make sure that your events don't impact your tenants?
This is something you have to be very careful about, right? Because it's very tempting. I have a person who runs my events, and of course she wants to fill the place up with events. And I have to constantly say, don't forget that event, while they will give us a little bit more money on the day, they are there for one day, and then they pack their bags and they're gone forever often, right? It's a one-off thing. But your tenants are there day in, day out. So just make sure that they're not, negatively impacting your tenants. Now, there will be a bit of disruption, and the woman you saw speaking in the video was talking about the wall of light. Mary Ann, who's lovely, she's a landscape architect, and she was, we had the school board come in with 400 students, and it was sort of like I wouldn't say it was a science fair, it was more a social innovation fair of how they felt they were going to change the world. And it was incredible to watch these kids in grades 7 and 8 come up with these unbelievable solutions. I actually felt intimidated by standing around all these kids. But I went to see Mary Ann. I said, are you okay? Because my Lord, they make noise. grade 7 and 8, wow. And she actually said it's great. It's a great vibe. It's a great buzz, and I'm so charged to see these kids. But you have to be careful of that. So, for instance, if you're going to have we had a fellow come in who was had a band and he wanted to practice, and we just said thanks but no thanks. You'll just be too disruptive. And he said, oh, we won't play that loud. And I went, no, absolutely not. So remember, your tenants always come first, because they're going to be there month in, month out, keeping you going.
That's great. Alan's from a performing arts space, and he'd like to know, how do you build a community?
So for a performance space, now I'm just speaking off the cuff here. I've never run a performance space before. That having been said, I used to run Queens Quay Terminal, and we had a large space for Harbourfront Centre on there. And I think it's really a question of getting your people who come and rent your performance space. For instance, if you have a creative workshop on how best to market your performances in the digital age, or over the internet, or how to sell tickets over the internet. I know a friend of mine in town is a musician, and he took a whole series of courses on how to create websites to directly sell your music to your fans. If you held things like that and invited all of your users in and got them to meet each other and discuss these issues in your space, then they would feel obviously a lot more connected to you than if they just come in, put on their performance, and walk out the door.
Great. Let's see. I don't want to pronounce your name wrong. Keifel has said Daniel Spectrum is a great film shoot friendly venue in downtown Toronto. What is your recommendation on how to market the venue to the film?
Well, isn't that interesting? We do quite a bit of film shoot. Obviously, as you saw from the building, it's Murdoch Mysteries comes 2 to 5 times a year. We've had tons of film shot here. So we're quite heavily connected with the film industry. So first thing you need to do, I would recommend, is go on OMDC, which is the website that the Government of Ontario runs on all the locations. So make sure you're on there. And don't show pretty pictures of your buildings. Show shots and angles that you think people would want for a movie. And so if you, again, meeting your tenants' needs, not your needs. And then make sure they're updated. And it will take you 6 to 8 weeks to get it updated. It's just a fact of life when dealing with OMDC, but that's your step 1. Step 2 is to start meeting location managers and taking them on tours and sending them emails twice a year on, hey, don't forget us. And what I would also do is, have a few, we did a 30-second video, and we sent it of photos of areas where they could shoot and sent it to all the location managers we knew. And the biggest thing I would recommend with location managers, you have to remember they're gun shy. If anything goes wrong in that shoot at that location, they will be hung out to dry on it. So you have to reassure them that it's going to work. So when the film managers or location manager comes through and said, what am I going to do about this? You say, can you do this? The answer is always yes, and work with them to solve the problem. Don't throw up roadblocks. As soon as you say, well, we can't do this and we can't do that and this is hard, they're gone. So when they come here and say, is it okay if everybody dances in purple pants on a Tuesday afternoon? You go, perfect, yes, absolutely. We will make that work. And we figure out a way of making it happen.
Great. I think we have time for one more question, and we've got a really good one here from Kate. How do you keep positive neighborhood relationships with other venues that might offer?
It's actually a lot easier than you think. Hamilton's an amazing place. It's a city of boosters, right? Everybody in Hamilton wants to see everyone else succeed. I've never seen anything like it. It's just fantastic. And the arts community, as ever, is 2 or 3 times that. We have a co-working space here, and we work actively with all the other co-working spaces. We meet with them regularly. In terms of being a venue, I sit on the board of the Hamilton Chamber of Commerce, and I sit there with one of the senior people at Carmen's, which is a big venue. You know, instead of being my competitors, we're seen as, you know, friends and people who help each other solve their problems. And if I have an issue, I will go to the fellow I know at Carmen's and say, how do you solve this? I think the biggest thing is reaching out. And I think if you're not seen as trying to steal away their business, but rather just being a colleague in the same field, you won't really have problems. But the biggest thing is to reach out. The biggest thing is to share. The biggest thing is to, for instance, there's International Co-working Day. And we were the ones who went to all the other co-working spaces in Hamilton and said, come on, let's all do something, and we'll do it all together. And we'll, you know, the morning started in the Seed Works, and then we came to our location, and then we went over to CoMotion. And these things, you know, if you build events with them where you're seen as making the sum greater than the parts, I don't think you'll have any problems with relationships with the existing venues.
Thank you so much, Rob. I think that's all the time we have for questions. So if you do have any further questions, please type them in the chat box, because I will see them and we're going to be able to collect those and find a way to answer them. I'll put my contact information as well as Stephanie's contact information in the chat box, so you can get in touch with us via email or by phone. Thank you so much to Rob for being here with us today and for sharing your knowledge and your experience with all of us. And thank you to everyone who joined us. Thank you for your patience while we dealt with some quick tech issues. We very much appreciate it. We'd also like to take a moment to just acknowledge our funders who made the learning series possible, OAC, Trillium, and Canadian Heritage. Thank you so much. We hope that you will join us for our next Learning Series webinar. We have two coming up back-to-back, which are February 22nd on landlord-tenant relations, and on February 23rd, we're going to be hearing from the Ottawa Art Gallery and the First Ontario Performing Arts Centre on their experiences with capital projects. So I'm going to put a link to our Eventbrite page in the chat box there, or you can head to our website where you'll be able to find a whole list of upcoming events. So Stephanie, if you want to pop back in, do you have any?
Just to thank Rob again for presenting today. It was a fantastic presentation, lots of great information. And also to thank ArtsBuild for making this possible. This was great. Just a reminder, folks, that there will be a recording made available of this session, so if you'd like to revisit, you can. And Ailey will also be sending out a brief survey so you can give us some feedback on what you enjoyed about the session, and if there's any other information you'd like to share about how we can improve the program. So thank you again. Ailey, other than that, I think we're...
So thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Rob.